everyone, it's Ateez here. Welcome to my channel, where today I'm going to be tackling formula use in K-pop because I feel like it's becoming an increasingly relevant topic, and I've seen more and more people throwing around the word formula and forming some pretty strong opinions without fully understanding what it actually means. So I wanted to dig into this and break it down a little. But before we get started, a big fat disclaimer here, and I mean fat. This is going to be a multi-minute one, so skip it at the risk of looking stupid in my comment section if you plan on yelling at me there. Because this is a video about formulas in K-pop, yes, I'm going to be talking about Teddy and by extension Blackpink. I started scripting this video back in early July, and as we head into the end of September, I have no idea how the contract renewals will shake out. As of the time of recording this, no announcements have been made, but that could change by the time that this goes up, so it's possible that Blackpink could be a really touchy subject right now. But I really wanted to get a video up, and I wasn't going to start on something entirely new. Just know that I hope the girls choose whatever is best for them, and that they're happy moving forward. Remember, I'm not talking about any of the girls as people, or even really as artists in this video. I'm simply talking about their music, which, let's be real, they have little to no control over anyway, so I'm not here to drag Blackpink through the mud. If anything, this is a critique of Teddy, their main producer. I just want to examine the different ways that music is constructed, and Teddy is very obvious in the way that he does it. But I also wanted to have a point of comparison, which means I'm also going to be talking about Eden and, by extension, Ateez, because their music was also very formulaic in their first couple of years. Same thing goes here. Really, I just wanted someone to compare Teddy's formula use against, and I'm already very familiar with Eden's work, clearly, so it was just easier for me to go with him. I could have chosen several other producers because there have been many to use formulas over the years, but again, familiarity just to make things easier on myself, and I also feel like Eden was fairly obvious with his formula, so that's why I'm using him in particular. Now I'm gonna warn you, I'm gonna have a lot more positive things to say about Eden than I do about Teddy, and I know I'm probably gonna get some people who take one look at my channel name and go, "You're just trying to boost your faves," and I mean, it's not my fault that they've been cranking out bangers since debut. But, that was a joke, folks. But, in all seriousness, I just don't have the time right now to go through a new group's discography and break it all down, and Ateez was right there, so mainly it's just for personal ease, but I do acknowledge that I have a clear bias here, and I will be doing my best to keep things as objective as possible. So, short version, I'm just trying to examine how music is made so we can talk about it. I'm not out to get anyone, and be nice to each other in my comments section. I don't want to deal with any wars today. Please and thank you. Okay, now we can actually start the video.
24/7.
So first off, we need to establish what a formula is, because I see a lot of K-pop stans throw the word around very loosely without actually understanding it and the different ways that one can present itself. If we want to get all technical, Merriam-Webster defines it as, well, many things, but I think their most applicable definition here is a customary or set form or method allowing little room for originality. Now, when applying that definition to music, it usually pertains mainly to the structure of a song, but since structure is so central to a song, it creates a trickle-down effect, which means it also commonly impacts the instrumental, who sings what and when, pacing, lyricism, etc., etc. Basically, pretty much anything, but it still all stems from the structure. That is the root of a musical formula. The purpose in using a musical formula is to make it easier to make songs, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The process moves along a lot quicker when you already have a framework to start with and you don't have to build from scratch entirely. Where the issue emerges is when producers get complacent and stop experimenting within that formula. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's go through the two formulas that I will be bringing up in this video. Not everything is going to match perfectly. There will be exceptions, but in general, this is how their songs are structured. First up, Teddy with Blackpink. Because I'm focusing on Blackpink's music, I will be excluding their collaborations like Ice Cream, Bet You Wanna, and Sour Candy. Adding another artist and potentially another production team to a song will inevitably throw a wrench in the structure of things, so I'm ignoring those and only focusing on songs with the four girls. Now buckle up, because you're about to get really tired of hearing this sound. So Blackpink songs will almost always start with an instrumental section, and then Jennie will open the song and be followed by Lisa. There's been a couple of times where it's been Jisoo on that second part instead, but usually it is Lisa, and after those two finish their parts, we go into the pre-chorus that Rosé and Jisoo will share, and then we're on to the chorus. The chorus is very instrumental heavy and usually starts with the title of the song being spoken, followed by some sort of filler phrase, and then that will repeat. Sometimes they'll have a second section of the chorus with a new filler phrase being repeated, and then we'll be on to verse 2. Verse 2 is almost guaranteed to be entirely rap, with Lisa being there. Sometimes Jennie will be there too, but usually it's pretty quick, and then we're back to the pre-chorus again. This time, Rosé and Jisoo will swap whichever part they sang the first time around, and then it's the same chorus again. After that, we'll have a bridge that's usually done by Rosé and Jisoo, and then it's the famous YG party chorus, where the instrumental cranks up and a new onomatopoeia is repeated with the title thrown in a couple times as well, and then they close it out by saying the title for the last time. Okay. I know that was a really quick rundown, especially if you aren't already familiar with the formula, but you don't need to know it in detail. I will rehash anything that I want to discuss further, so now on to Eden with Ateez. Some notes before I dive into their outline. I'm keeping it to the first 3 EPs they released because there's too much otherwise, and I think that's where their formula was the strongest, so if you find otherwise or disagree, then please drop that in a comment because I know for a fact that some of their more recent releases still follow this formula. Also, Eden's formula isn't as clear-cut, so I can't list member by member who is going to appear when exactly. It's more like he has his building blocks that he trades in and out, and the members just fit in wherever. It's not as rigid, so you're not going to find a ton of songs that fit the formula perfectly. It's more that you'll notice a trend appearing only for him to switch 1 or 2 sections up completely, but that the larger trend is still present enough to create a common thread. So their songs also start with a short instrumental intro that leads into verse 1. Verse 1 will have a short vocal section and then a rap section, sometimes with another short vocal section sandwiching the rap. It's common for Yunho and seonghwa to be here, and the rap is usually hongjoong. The pre-chorus will usually have jongho and san on it, though sometimes seonghwa makes an appearance as well, and it's very common for wooyoung to get the one line right before the chorus hits. And as soon as we get to the chorus, this is ironically where they get the most experimental. You'll usually find jongho and san here, but it's a pretty even split between everyone else other than yeosang. Yeosang is literally not in a single chorus. That's just not allowed, I guess. Heading into verse 2, this section is usually entirely rap. Sometimes there's a short vocal section in here if they remembered that they still hadn't given any lines to yeosang, but usually it's Mingi's moment to shine or he'll split the verse with hongjoong. Then we're on to the second pre-chorus, which is either going to be the exact same as the first or swap out one of the vocalists for someone else. They literally never change it any more than that. The second chorus is going to follow that same concept of either being the same or changing one thing. Now, what that change looks like can be a little different here, but it's going to be something small, like, again, swapping one member for another or adding some ad-libs over top. Little minuscule things. So then we hit the bridge where they're going to pick one of 2 options, vocal-focused or rap-focused. If it's a vocal-focused bridge, you're going to hear jongho and san and also probably yeosang for like 2 seconds because, oh wait, he still needs lines too. Side note, I'm sorry for all these jokes I'm making about yeosang, but going back and listening, it's just genuinely crazy how few lines he got. The other rap-focused option is going to include, you guessed it, the rappers, Mingi and hongjoong, and jongho will also be there. Regardless of which option they go with, it's gonna end with a jongho high note, and then the final chorus will either be the same as the last, with jongho continuing to high note over it, or a complete switch up where they have a new melody or chant to close out the song. Alright, so there we have it. Here are our 2 formulas. And before we start digging in, note that I will mainly be referring to title tracks for both groups in my examples just to cut down on volume, and also because I feel like title tracks are meant to be the main representation of your musical identity, but know that I have listened to most of Blackpink's discography and all of the Ateez EPs aforementioned. So now let's start breaking things down. Substance is an aspect that can pretty much be figured out by asking the question, how full is your formula? Where a lot of people get misled is thinking that this is a one-size-fits-all kind of situation. Obviously, your formula needs to have enough substance to fill roughly 3 minutes without getting boring. If your formula isn't dense enough, then it's far too easy to experience the common pitfall of patching that issue with repetition. At a low level, there's nothing wrong with repetition. In fact, it's even essential to establishing the pattern of a song and its cohesion. However, rely too heavily on repetition, and it can water down the song and nothing flat. I'm sure a lot of you already know where I'm going with this. Teddy and his filler phrase phenomenon. When like 80% of your choruses are entirely nonsense filler phrases, we have a problem. And Edenary's not entirely innocent here either. I mean, look at Ateez's first 3 title tracks. Now, where Edenary differs is with Ateez's dual title track method. For every title track with a filler phrase chorus, there is one complementary one with a fully fleshed out chorus. If you only have a few songs that rely on filler phrases, then it's more excusable, but when it's at the center of your formula, as it is with Ateez, it's not as artistically beneficial because there's not enough substance to work with and play around with. By overusing filler phrases, your options are limited to incessant repetition, over-reliance on instrumental, or adding in more filler phrases, at which point your chorus is usually now a chant chorus and our problem has evolved entirely. But that is quite literally another video. Go watch that later if you want. So, filler phrases can create a lot of problems really easily, but that doesn't mean that they're inherently bad. In fact, they work great as a means of spicing up background vocals or creating a catchy line that will stick in people's heads, and that is when they're used sparingly around vocal lines with varying lyrics. Take Pink Venom versus Shutdown, for example, since I think many of us can agree that Shutdown's chorus is more sonically diverse and compelling. Pink Venom's chorus is mainly comprised of filler phrases. It's to the point where the very brief parts with actual lyrics feel like they were thrown in at the last minute, and that's where the problem starts to arise. If your longer lyrics are either non-existent or feel like an afterthought in comparison to the filler phrases, you've gone too far in your efforts to make a simple and catchy melody. Now, looking at Shutdown's chorus, that dynamic is flipped. The longer lyrics take center stage, and the filler phrase of whip it, whip it, whip it, whip it now feels like the afterthought itself because it takes up so much less space. And this is generally how you should want filler phrases to feel inside of a chorus. After all, that's kind of in the name, filler phrase. They're there to fill space and not do much more, so using them to bridge the small gaps between lines that don't quite fit together in the early stages of song building is basically the extent of what they're meant to do. Unless... See, I kinda lied there. Yes, filler phrases are typically used intentlessly, and that's acceptable, but there are things that you can do to add more intent behind them and make them a little more interesting, and Shutdown is actually a great example of this. Most of the chorus is this slow glide through the lower registers of the girls' voices. It's smooth and elongated to the point that even the consonants come out sticky. But then the whip it, whip it, whip it comes in and disrupts that relaxed pace with how rushed those words are. It's the smallest, subtlest thing, but that little disruption gives the filler phrase a greater purpose than just filling space. Of course, though, this isn't exactly a very common occurrence for Teddy, so I'm going to continue criticizing his over-reliance on filler phrases in his formula until it is no longer the norm. Moving on from that gripe, another big problem that I don't see anyone talking about is verse density, or how many different people sing or rap in a verse. Looking at Teddy's formula for Blackpink, you'll notice it's almost always only 2 of them on the verses. Sometimes it's even only 1 of them, such as in How You Like That's second verse or D4's second verse. And I wouldn't harp on it if it was only one of the verses that was consistently like this, but the issue is that it's almost every single one. Cycling through some of their titles and pre-releases, Playing with Fire, As If It's Your Last, D4, and How You Like That all have 2 people on verse 1 and only 1 person on verse 2. Kill This Love, Lovesick Girls, Pink Venom, and Shutdown have 2 people on each verse, and Boombaya is a bit tricky because there's technically a refrain that could fit into either the pre-chorus or verse depending on how you look at it. If you don't count it, there's only 1 member on each verse, but if you do, there's 3, in which case, yay, they made it to 3 in one of their titles. Having only one or two members on a verse shouldn't be a huge problem. After all, there's only 4 girls in the group, so they're at a natural disadvantage here. I'll cut Teddy some slack there. But not much, because he always uses the same 2 members, and why? I'll give him this. Jisoo has sung in 3 verses. Verses 1 of Playing with Fire, As If It's Your Last, and How You Like That. But I'm also going to take that right back because Rosé has never sung in the verse of a Blackpink title track. She has in some of their B-sides and tracks with other artists, but just never their title tracks, which, you know what, we'll get back into that one later. I've already strayed too far from the point. I just wish Teddy would use 3 members in a verse because it would really help bulk up the structure. And if you don't believe me, take a look at the runtime of their title's second verses and compare it to something like Whistle, where 3 members are in each verse. Having only 1 or 2 people on a verse is going to make it a lot harder to fill it out completely, so it's not uncommon for production teams to just cut it shorter in fear of listeners getting bored of hearing the same voice for too long. And that's common in Blackpink's second verses. Not the getting bored, the cutting it short, just wanted to be extra clear there. It's just such a shame because, imagine if Jennie's rap in D4's second verse was longer than 13 seconds. Imagine. Or another thing they could do is allow Jennie and Lisa to trade lines rather than existing in their own little chunks of a song. Eden does this a lot with Hongjoong and Mingi, and Teddy actually does this himself in verse 2 of Kill This Love. He just hasn't done it since, and I would love to see Jennie and Lisa trade lines more since I think they have great chemistry for it. But I still want to see them have more than 2 people in their verse because it just makes for more dynamic songs, and here's where I bring up Eden because I discovered something that I would like to share with the class. You know their song Wave? Their popular, summery, fun one, the Hakuna Matata? Yeah, Eden fits all 8 members into the first verse, which is roughly 37 seconds long. What an absolute mad lad. Now, that is not the norm by any means. I just wanted to call attention to it because, wow, okay. Ateez's verses actually aren't significantly longer than Blackpink's, only by a few seconds, but the difference is in the density. Again, they have the advantage of double the members, but it's usually not anything too crazy. In fact, there's usually one verse with only 2 members, but they'll usually take the other and split the vocal lines among 2 or 3 vocalists, which would add up to an average of about 3 or 4 people on the other verses once you factor the rap in. Even just that increase of 1 or 2 people will result in more vocal variation, something that I'll get into later, and it can also create more tightly packed verses that have fewer gaps of silence between lines, which makes it a lot easier to drive energy through verses, something that both Ateez and Blackpink aim to do. So, long section. We've discussed how substance plays an important role in a formula, but what can we do when substance fails? If I stick with summing up each section or concept with a single question, this one would have to be, how flexible is your formula? Variation has a push and pull relationship with substance. Significant substance limits variation to a degree, but more variation is able to justify songs with less substance to an impressive extent. There's a ton of ways variation can take form, but I'm going to focus in on structure, vocal direction, and instrumental. So structure is probably the most minimal in its variation because, after all, we are working within a formula. Change the structure too much and you risk it becoming unrecognizable from the original formula, which normally isn't a bad thing, but if you're using the formula, my guess is that you would want to stick to it at least somewhat for a reason like musical identity, for example. And these variations can be as small as swapping which member sings what part. This is actually one of the easiest ways to create variation within a formula because you don't have to change anything about the song-making process. Just shuffle around the order in which members appear and make sure they can all comfortably deliver their lines, and their natural tonal differences will do enough of the heavy lifting that the blatant formula use seems at least less apparent. Eden regularly shuffles vocalists around and occasionally plays with the location of raps or throws in a random refrain before the pre-chorus. Yes, he has tendencies that he falls back on, hence the formula, but nothing is ever really set in stone. Teddy, not so much. Now, again, I want to point out that Teddy is at an inherent disadvantage here because Blackpink only has 4 members. Eden is working with double the amount, which means it's a lot easier for him to mix and match who gets to sing what and keep the song interesting through those means. However, I also want to acknowledge that all 4 members of Blackpink sing and have incredibly distinct vocal tones, so there's still a lot of opportunity to create structural variation. but instead we always get Rose and Jisoo sharing the pre-chorus. And they sound great every time. It's just I would love to hear them in a different place for once. I remember when How You Like That came out, and my initial reaction to the first 30 seconds was, Jisoo is singing in the first verse? If I am genuinely floored that the lead vocalist in your 4-member and at the time 4-year-old group is singing in the first verse of a song, you're doing something wrong. And it's not just Rose and Jisoo with this. Jennie almost always starts the song, Lisa almost always has the part right after. I shouldn't be able to predict the exact order that the members are going to appear in and be right 95% of the time, formula or not. Not only is it anticlimactic as a listener, but it's also restricting for the girls who always end up singing and performing the same sections. And that kind of gets me into vocal direction. If you aren't varying your structure, you can at least vary the way that the members deliver their lines or the types of lines that they're given, because that's the fun part about singing. Voices can change in so many different ways, and a good producer will take advantage of those possible changes to the fullest extent. Eden and the team over at KQ do a really good job with this. Hongjoong and Mingi don't really change their vocal tones that much, but they don't do a lot of singing, so it's not like there's a ton of room for variation with them. The only other member that doesn't really change vocal tones a ton is Jongho, and that's probably because they want him to act as a recognizable vocal center for the group. That, and he's their token high note dude, which I do have my gripes with, but that is another video that will be made eventually, trust me. The rest of them, however, showcase an extreme spectrum of tones. San hadn't quite discovered his depth yet in their rookie days, but he still played with the focus of his sound, going from light and airy to strong and powerful. Yunho has always had this deep, dark sound, but he's also capable of a floaty falsetto. And heck, seonghwa goes from light and bouncy to deep and heavy within 20 seconds of the exact same song. But they also play with range on top of tone, which is really apparent with yeosang and wooyoung in Hala Hala and Illusion. Yeosang's part in the second verse of Hala Hala is very nasal and relatively high for him. But his part in the opening of Illusion is deep and rich. Wooyoung sings the exact same notes at the beginning of Illusion right after yeosang. And though it's more nasal and not as full as yeosang's delivery, it's still really deep for Wooyoung. And moving over to the beginning of Hala Hala, he has higher notes in a way lighter and breathier tone. So there are just some of the many ways that Eden and Ateez change things up vocally. And that's me limiting it to their first 3 releases, but they've kept pushing and pushing the boundaries of vocal delivery as time goes on to a legitimately impressive extent. Now, Teddy with Blackpink feels a lot more stagnant, but there are definitely some other things to factor in here. So first off, the numbers disadvantage again. Fewer members means fewer vocal tones to work with, include that they're all female voices, and that's another disadvantage because men just tend to have more expansive ranges than women do. Given those 2 things, I'm willing to cut Teddy some slack here. It's also worth mentioning that the members of Blackpink have incredibly unique and distinct voices, arguably some of the most unique and distinct in the industry. Playing into that by keeping their voices super consistent across songs helps build a sonic brand. It's clearly been effective since most of us can pick any of their voices out of a crowd no problem. But that doesn't mean that there aren't ways that they can change their tones without sacrificing that recognizable brand. Since nearly all of their songs are hard-hitting and rely on a girl boss concept, their vocals are usually very strong to match it, which makes sense, but I still think that there are more creative ways to go about a strong concept. Teddy has been doing better with this in their more recent releases, but it's still not great, and ironically, it's the rappers that actually showcase the most diverse vocals. Lisa is typically pretty nasal, and Jennie usually has this brassy quality to her voice, but we hear them along a wide variety of ranges and occasionally playing with their tone. Lisa tends to live in the lowest range out of all of the members, But even in those lower ranges, she sometimes darkens her tone a little, and listen to the little bit of vocal frying she incorporates into the end of each line here at the beginning of Lovesick Girl. It's the tiniest thing, but once you notice it, it really stands out, and she does also get to sing higher sometimes. And we even get some head voice in Kill This Love. And that part goes for Jennie too. She sounds super relaxed there, even though her part in the first verse has a lot more bite to it. And similar to Lisa's vocal fry in Lovesick Girls, she does these slides where her tone thins out to almost a squeak. Again, small detail, big impact. While Jennie doesn't sit as low as Lisa, she still has her moments. And she tends to have some higher, beltier notes as well. So that's about a 50-50 ratio for who showcases different tones or ranges relatively often, but I still think Teddy needs to push it further, especially considering there are only 4 members in the group. I mean, they already have such captivating vocal colors. Imagine how many different sounds we could get if you just experimented a little more. I would love to hear more softer tones from Rosé and Jisoo, particularly breathier ones, but I honestly would take anything that's just less aggressive for them. I feel like Rosé would fit a more sly and almost cheeky kind of dominance with her voice. I would kill to get more of something like Whistle from her. Like, it just sounds so good, but instead it was randomly decided that she has to be belting out all of her lines unless it's like one of their rare slower songs. And it would be so satisfying to use her voice as a way to pull back the song before exploding into something bigger. And this just popped into my head, but imagine something like Everglow's Adios or Dun Dun, but with Rosé and Blackpink.
Goodbye ever adios. What? Goodbye ever adios. Yeah. Goodbye ever adios. Goodbye ever adios. You're so dun 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 dun. You're so dun.
It would be so good. It would be so good. Or even with Jisoo, that would sound great too. Why are we not doing this? Other than that, I would also love to see her lower register utilized more. We got some of it in Shutdown, but I would love to hear more because from what I can hear, she actually has a really strong lower register that just doesn't get showcased often enough. I have pretty much the same complaints with Jisoo, but my biggest thing I want to see with her is vibrato, because like, where is it? I know she has it. I know it's there, and I would imagine it sounds amazing. So why do I pretty much only ever hear her singing with a straight tone? Like, I get that she didn't join YG intending to be a vocalist, but she is capable of some vibrato and some runs. And even if she weren't, you can train that stuff up, but instead we're just gonna ignore that entire other dimension of her voice and keep her singing in a straight tone, okay? All of this is to say that challenging vocalists to sing in different ranges and using different techniques will not only benefit the artists themselves, but it will also expand the spectrum of styles available for their music. But let's play devil's advocate here and say we're working with an incredibly vocally limited group and we still didn't want to change the structure too much. What else can we do to add some variation? Well, the last big factor in a song is the instrumental. By throwing in different styles or instruments, you can play with more textures and combine them into something that sounds relatively new to most people. This one is probably the most effective, especially on first listen, just because instrumentals are very prominent even to an untrained ear. Normal people aren't going to listen to every second of a song examining the vocal technique of each member, but they will recognize a distinct instrumental right away. I think this is something that Eden does a really good job with. He plays with a lot of different sounds, and I personally think that a lot of his instrumentals are memorable. I mean, Pirate King is... It's literally pirate EDM. I cannot think of a better way to describe it. But he also has this really cool orchestral intro that feels super cinematic. In their next comeback, he uses flute and acoustic guitar, while the other title, Hala Hala, is still EDM, but it's more of a futuristic industrial feel than Pirate King. Illusion pulls from hip-hop influences but includes prominent piano in the verses. And the chorus is super brass heavy. Wave clearly is filled to the brim with Caribbean influences. But it also has some acoustic guitar thrown in there. Just within their first few titles, you can clearly hear the range of Eden's instrumental production. They're incredibly diverse and distinct, and that makes them more memorable within Ateez's discography. Now, Teddy has definitely made some memorable instrumentals, but I wouldn't label them distinct, save for a few. A lot of them rely heavily on EDM with pop influences, but some have certain elements that stick out. Take, for example, the brass in Kill This Love. A lot of people will not agree with me on this, but this brass line had a chokehold on me for a while. If you think I'm crazy for that, then we can look at their more recent releases with the classical sample in Shutdown, and the traditional Korean instruments used in Pink Venom. I also want to point out that Pink Venom is more of an anti-drop than anything else, which is something very new for Blackpink. Do I think it's a particularly effective anti-drop? No, but it's something different, and I'm willing to appreciate some experimentation. Same thing with the hip-hop section and Shutdown's second verse. I think it sticks out, but I can appreciate the sentiment. Teddy doesn't have a great track record when it comes to originality within instrumentals, but maybe he's seen some of the criticism and decided to switch some things up a little. Okay, we've finally reached the end of this section. Variation can come in several different forms, whether that be structure, vocal direction, or instrumental, but no matter what, it's important to consider when using a formula. Using all three forms of variation would be ideal, but I would say that at least one is necessary to have a successful formula. This technically could have gone in the variation section, but I wanted to separate it out because, well, that section was getting way too long, but also it's a broader view on variation. All of the ideas in the previous section will still apply here, but overall, how different are your songs in genre and concept? This isn't me saying that every song needs to sound wildly different or that a group should undergo a sudden concept change as often as possible. After all, we know historically how that has gone for several groups, such as Weekly. But groups do need to experiment with different genres and concepts in order to avoid creative stagnation. I don't know who came up with the idea for Blackpink to have both black concepts that were harder and edgier and pink concepts that were lighter and more fun, but they knew what they were doing. Looking at Blackpink's first few releases, there's a big difference between the pounding bass of Boombayah, the slower tempo of Playing with Fire, and the upbeat pop of As If It's Your Last. It's all pop with electronic influence, but they're all treated differently because of their concepts. Then D4 happened, and everyone at YG just lost the plot and decided that pink concepts weren't worth it. This is a problem because it forced this one-dimensional girl boss image on them that they still haven't really been able to shake to this day, and that limits their appeal to different audiences. This is just basic marketing. If your music is predominantly hard-hitting girl crush, you are alienating an entire population that would appreciate something lighter and evoking the ire of girl group stans who, by 2018, were sick and tired of the loud girl crush trend. And I get it, girl crush is what got and continues to get them money, but that doesn't excuse the massive pitfalls that it summoned for them creatively, nor the damage it's done to how people view the girls, particularly Jennie. I will say, there was a small effort to change that with Lovesick Girls, something more emotional but still lighthearted and fun. However, it was quickly overshadowed by the popularity of How You Like That, and since then there hasn't really been an attempt to return to a pink concept. And because I know people are going to point to a handful of B-sides and try to use those to invalidate my entire argument, no. A few songs sounding different does not justify the titles sounding largely the same because the titles drive the concept. If anything, there should be an emphasis on diversifying the titles while still keeping to the group's musical identity. It's not an easy task by any means, but producers aren't getting paid millions of dollars for nothing here. It's all about finding that balance between a group's sound and image and the experimentation that will keep things fresh. So how much music are you making? I can practically hear YG sweating. Yes, this is in relation to the stupid dungeon. As I covered earlier, the entire point of using a formula is to expedite the songwriting process, usually diminishing creativity as a trade-off for speed. Songs may have slight to major similarities, but that's more excusable when considering how many more songs will be made in a certain time period. Oh wait. A higher concentration of formula use should equal more music being made overall because of the significantly lower amount of effort that it takes to produce formulaic music. But alas, YG loves their dungeon. This is an issue because the fewer songs you have, the easier it is for people to make it through their entire discography and notice, hey, there's an obvious pattern going on here, which looks bad on the group because people will perceive them as one-dimensional artists. I hope you don't need me to explain why being labeled one-dimensional could be problematic in K-pop. In the case that an artist has more songs, then at least fans are getting more music to listen to, and it takes people longer to sift through everything to find the overlapping elements. However, that's still not ideal, since while the music is released more consistently, it still suffers from a lack of creativity. To remedy that, the tweaks that I've mentioned, such as vocal direction, instrumental, etc., should be implemented into each formulaic song to some extent to differentiate them. It takes a lot more dedication to notice the similarities when many more differences are present. So that's the ideal way to have a formula-heavy discography, but it's important for me to mention that even if a wide variety of variation is used in every song, it still won't be quite enough because a formula is still a formula. Having songs that break out of that is essential to having an inventive discography and allowing for a wider range of expression. To make anything truly groundbreaking, production teams need to experiment outside of their usual and push some boundaries. It's okay to use a formula to make a larger discography in a shorter period. In fact, that's just smart and an effective use of time. However, that can't be all you do. YG's dungeon tactic and insistence on keeping Teddy as Blackpink's primary producer has them committing both sins. Their discography is short and overly reliant on Teddy's formula. Because it's not just one or the other, but both, it's no wonder why people see them as the poster group for formulaic music and are defining their understanding of what a musical formula is around them, when that understanding is often flawed or even just straight up false. Formulas should not be this horribly strict and limiting tactic of carbon copying everything from one song to the next, nor should they be an easy way to pump out a new track every week. A happy medium of using formulas to start a song and molding it into something new as writing, arranging, and production progresses is the best way to ensure that timelines can be sped up without entirely sacrificing creativity. So there is my video on formulas. It is done! Finally! This thing has been like 2 months in the making, and it's massive, but it is done. So sorry if things didn't seem quite as fleshed out in the last couple of sections, but I was running out of steam over here, and I just wanted to move on to the next video. But that does it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. What are some other groups that you've noticed use formulas? Do they do it well or not so well? Also, as I came up for the title for this video, I was thinking, hey, maybe this has potential to be another series of some kind. Like, this thing is a problem, but also it sometimes works. So if you have other gripes with K-pop music, drop them in the comments and I might be able to make this like a regular thing. Also, if you liked the video, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel as it really helps me out. Thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you all next time. Bye!